Okay, I think we should start. It's a very great pleasure that Will Alsop is going to speak this evening. I think we were discussing it before, like quite a long time since Will's been to give a talk in the evening. I remember he was here to make a presentation at Cedric's memorial, but it's great to have you here this evening. Many of you will know sort of through the kind of mechanisms of oral history at the AA that Will was a student here and kind of famously came second in the competition for the Pompidou Centre at, I think, the royal old age of 23. So ask yourself how old you are, etc. What?
Asking myself.
Yes. You are 60 what? 65, yes. Well, it's just I noticed you were born in 1947, which was the same year that I was born, and it was a very cold winter.
I don't remember
No.
that.
Anyway, since then he's gone on to do, I deliberately use the word like a plethora of things. I mean, first of all, you often get successful artists nodding terribly solemnly about the importance of art and other kind of arenas, but they're little to be seen at it, still less making it. Will is a kind of maker, and you feel, if architecture was made illegal, he'd simply find something else to make. Actually, if architecture was illegal, he'd just carry on doing it. As I say, he was trained here. He worked for Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew, and then joined the office of Cedric Price for a number of years. 5 years, was it, or something? 4 years. More recently, he won the Stirling Prize for the Peckham Library, and has designed RIBA Award-winning schemes at Queen Mary University, London, and Ontario College of Art and Design. He was elected to the Royal Academy and has recently built in London, Manchester, Shanghai, Beijing and Singapore. He also is the principal of the multidisciplinary practice, All Design, which is based, I think, in Battersea at the site with the Royal College and indeed with the Norman Foster office. We're extremely pleased to welcome you here this evening, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
I hate those introductions because I hate being reminded of things because it does make you feel old. And I was very disappointed when Mark mentioned my age of 65 that you didn't all say, "No, I don't believe it." So I'll go home now. Thank you, my darling. I think the last time I actually stood in this very place doing what I'm doing now was so long ago that you could actually smoke and drink as well as talk. Well, you can still drink and you can still talk, but sadly you can't smoke. It's a terrible cough you have, Mark. And if you don't mind me saying. But no, I just got over mine. And the great thing about getting a bit older, and it happens to all of us all the time, and it doesn't stop, is that you somehow become more relaxed. And of course, I started here in 1968, but and here I am, what is it, 2013? Unbelievable. Now, I haven't been here for a long time, and we might speculate on why I haven't been to the AA for a long time, but that's for later. What I'm going to talk about tonight, well, let me say, I have far too many slides to get through. So, Andrea, you will tell me when I've talked for an hour, and then I'll just stop, okay? But I like it like that, so it's very relaxed, and sometimes I can be very verbose, and if I'm being verbose, you must stop me, too. Because there's quite a lot of things. And I want to start off with just reminding you of a few things, just with the single picture that I've actually done. That's, you understand, to establish my credibility. And then I go into Never Never Land in some other ways, which is fine. If I was being radical, which I like being radical, I should start off by saying one of the results of being older is that if I could pass a law which says you're not allowed to knock anything down, I would pass that law. You can add things on the top, you can things on the side, you can convert. And it seems to me, from an urban point of view, that would be really interesting. It would result in a real mishmash. And I think it comes from having worked a lot with communities and people. I like to involve the community where it's not always possible, but where I can, because they always have better ideas than you and me. Underneath the essence of what they do, the essence of things. But the one thing that worries them is about knocking things down, because, of course this doesn't apply to you at all, is that they can't trust the architect to put up anything better. For some very mediocre buildings, they would like to keep them, and I think maybe they're right. Maybe I find myself agreeing with Prince Charles, but the solution, I don't agree with Prince Charles. But on the other hand, some of his comments are very pertinent to the world that some of us either occupy or will occupy or whatever. So I think that's absolutely vital. Anyway, I could go on, and that's my problem, so I will go on. Now, it looks a bit indulgent here. The first three pictures are all photographs of me. Not because I particularly like me. Well, I do quite like me, actually. I mean, it's all right. But this is one place. It's not the only place. It's one place where I work. And I put this there because it represents to me the sort of things I feel that you need in order to work. Now, you'll notice there's no computer. Well, I do use the computer, but it does send you to sleep, I find. Do you find that? Particularly in the middle of the afternoon, staring at this screen, you just go on. But actually, you can carry on drawing. And the great thing about drawing and sketchbooks, which I'm sure you all have, is that you can put them in your pocket and you can work in a sketchbook wherever you are, on the bus, in a plane, or whatever it is. Or my favourite place, at the kitchen table after my wife's gone to bed. It's sort of peaceful. So the sketchbook is vital, because that's the essence. It's where the essence of very often things start. Not always the right thing, but it's about making a start. And I like to think that architecture is it's more of an evolutionary process. It's not about dogma, and I'm very jealous of you, because you are much younger than me, that actually the notions of a particular way of making architecture have sort of, by and large, disappeared. You have a very open field in front of you to explore all sorts of things, and you should make hay. Of course, architects are often really bad people who, once you begin to remove some of those rules, remove some of those dogmas, then they start reinventing them. And I won't mention any names, but maybe I will later. But I find that I don't understand why you would want to do that. And so I don't know how many you are here tonight, but you're all individuals, and you all have something, I believe, to give, which actually reflects you and your interaction with the world, and that somehow becomes something built. Doesn't mean we'll all like what each other do. That's not the point. It doesn't matter. The point is you are trying to do something, and you can see, and you know, as you walk around or experience many of our cities around the world, you can see the vast majority of buildings, there was not a clue. There was no sense of inquiry, exploration, or trying to do something. So I think failure is permitted. Don't mind that, as long as you were trying. But actually not to try is the sin. So also on this table you see there's a model on the left, which is made of steel, which has some fun. It's not a hedgehog, I assure you. I have planning permission for that. And it will be built as an extension to my building at Queen Mary's, which Mark referred to earlier, which is medical research laboratories. On the right is a bit more. So fiddling around with materials, I think, is good. And of course, you'll see in the background, actually not a very bad painting, I think, but it doesn't matter. It's like having an enormous sketchbook. So there's nearly always a large canvas, or two or three sometimes, going on in the upper, so that you can actually sort of see that you might do nothing on it for 2 or 3 days, and then you suddenly see something. But very often, with the development, with the use of painting, it's sometimes now, as I get older, I do painting just for the sake of painting. Sometimes they're related to this process of evolution, of discovering what a piece of architecture might want to be. And I try and maintain a very open mind. That was just to remind you that we do age, really. I just like this painting. No, I was in Liverpool the other day. You were talking this scheme, which where I was treated very badly by Liverpool Council, I have to say, and we won. It's a thing called The Cloud, and I was surprised to see that that was only 9 years ago. I thought, my God, what's happened to me in 9 years? But I just used this picture in Liverpool the other day to remind them the way they treated me made me grow fatter and older. Took to the drink, my dear. But we're not going to talk about the scheme tonight. And the third picture of me is relatively recent, and that's doing painting. That's to prove that I'm still able to bend down. And to work horizontally, I think, is actually quite important sometimes. But don't do it in your shoes, and only wear old socks that you can throw away afterwards. In other words, the way that you work influences what you do. And I think it's very important, and certainly, and I'll say more about that later on. But you know, within a school, and certainly this school has expanded in size, and there is more space than when I was here. In fact, there was so little space here that a group of us had to create a studio somewhere else in order to do the work, because it was a sort of cupboard atmosphere here, and it's not good. And I have to say, from what I've seen, I was here fairly recently, just to have a drink, you understand. And it's wonderful. You know, acres of space. I was totally jealous. But I suspect there's still not enough. I'm sure that's true. There never is. So, I've done this. And it's Peckham Library, and it's won Stirling Prize. And what I'm proud about here is that to this day, and I do check things sometimes, is there are still three times the number of people using this than it was designed for. I think that's good. It's not good for the carpet inside, but it's good for everything else, and people use it in ways that you could not have imagined. So that's one sort of message that one learns, and you can only learn this from doing it, of course, which as students, you don't do it, so you don't learn these things. So I can pass it on to a certain extent, that by doing it, you learn that people respond, and they do things in libraries which you never imagined that they would do, like falling in love, for example. It's no bad thing. Have you ever fallen in love in a library? No? God, you don't know what you're missing. And I think this was built as a result of a competition in Marseille in 1990, so it's quite old. And I'm just showing you this because I did, it's quite a big building. But it's a regional government headquarters, Hôtel du Département. And it's quite big, and it was built as part of a regeneration scheme because it's in the northern inner part of Marseille, which is really run down. So by putting this building, which houses 2,000 people working in there, it would help regenerate the location. It has. What they didn't imagine there is, to this day, it's another sort of fact, that there are 750,000 people go and see this building. It's not a museum. They just go to see the building. Something that annoys my client from time to time because they have to employ people to show them around the building. But I like that. They weed it out. Marseille is not a tourist destination. Maybe it should be, I think, because not that my building, but I think the place is. And when I first went to Marseille, I hated it. And then as you spend time, as I had to there, you realise it's a really interesting place. It's a place that reveals its many, many secrets slowly and becomes better because of that. And so if I had to choose between living in Paris and Marseille, I think if I had to, I'm not sure I'd ever live in France, really. I hope there's no French people here. But nonetheless, I think I would choose Marseille. Not just because of the sea and slightly warmer than Paris, but it's you can stand in, I always feel in Paris, you can stand in one street, there's no need to go to any of the others because they're all the same. It's true. It fits in with my idea of not knocking things down and just building on things. In other words, one of the most dangerous things is having an architectural idea. Be careful. That's the front of the same building. And that's a little detail at the back. Slightly more recently, it was only finished last year. This is in Shanghai, by the river. It's the International Cruise Terminal. And I don't have a pointer, but basically what I've done, it goes from that sort of bubble on the left-hand side, you can just make it out, and the park, and then there's a series of fairly low-rise buildings that go along by the river edge. And it's a mixed development. There is the cruise terminal itself proper, which is not very big. And then there's offices. Inevitably in China there's shopping. There's always shopping in China. When people ring up and say, would you be interested in doing it? You say, what is it? And they say, well, we'd like a museum, and we'd like this, and a little bit of residential. And so shopping. It's always shopping. You just have to wait. I hate shopping, but anyway, we do it. And so that's coming closer. So you can just see where the light's catching the front of the building, and you can just see the bubble on the left. It's about roughly 800 metres of waterfront. And the traditional Bund is just off to the left of this picture. There's the terminal. And in that line of buildings, there was one gap where I couldn't put any footings down because there's a tunnel that goes under the river. And therefore we bridged over it with a portal, and on top of this is a nightclub. On top of the nightclub on the roof is an Italian restaurant. The thing on the right is a 4-storey restaurant, and then the other two bits are hanging bars. And what do I say? It's there. Works. It continues. It does line up, I hesitate to say, with a road that goes off at right angles. So it is a sort of focal point as you approach the development from the west. But I quite like this. And I particularly like it when I show it to clients in England who are thinking about using us. And they say, you can't do these sorts of things. I say, well, you can if you're in China. I'm making no architectural claims for this. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And you can see the restaurant things, and then the remainder of the offices going down. And there are basically places for the stomach most of the way along this park. One thing I really like about China is you can do landscapes which they look after. Now, I've often thought that the evolution of going alongside the supposed importance of public space, as though we'd just discovered it, which I never understand because it's always been around, and that everything that we really revere was done a long time ago, and quite rightly. And then suddenly it becomes popular, and then the landscape architect becomes suddenly an important member of the team. And then they do their stuff, and then it becomes institutionalised design, doesn't it? A railway sleeper, a silver birch, and crushed slate. And it's like a palette of materials which you see over and over again, not just here, but all around the world. Never ever do that. In fact, you're probably all better, if you think about the landscape around whatever project you're doing, you'll probably do it better because you're not a landscape architect than a landscape architect. Are there any landscape architects in the room? Oh, what a pity. We could have had fun. Never mind. And there's the detail of it at night. This is the Ontario College of Art and Design, which is perched on the legs here. They're 9 stories up. Oh, let's find another picture. So the buildings, the extension starts 9 stories up, and of course you can see where my idea of adding to existing structures. The brick building, we could continue to function as a school of art and design while we were building this. Of course, when they appointed me, they thought I was going to put a building on the ground just on the south end, the far end of the existing brick building. And what I discovered, because I knew, I did a bit of research, that when the Art Gallery of Ontario, which has more recently been extended and added to by Frank Geary, hadn't at that time when I got this project, I knew that when they'd made some alterations about 12 years before I was appointed on here, all the locals were up in arms. And the reason they were up in arms is that the Art Gallery of Ontario never asked them, never consulted them about anything. And I thought, well, I'm not going to make that mistake. So I maybe did over consultation on this, worked with the students, the staff, and most importantly, the local residents. And there's one thing that I found, and by working with them, I mean getting them to draw and to paint and to actually be a part of, I don't like the word creative, but you know what I mean, part of that process. So I had not done anything at that time apart from had the idle sketch in my sketchbook, which was not a flying tabletop. And the people on the left, you can just make out their apartments. It's 9 stories high. And some people behind this building, there's a park, you saw it in the first image. They all said, if you didn't put a building where you're supposed to, we could extend the park and it would improve this street, which is not a great street, but they were right. I said, well, that's right. Where would you like to put the building? And they said, well, we could put it on the roof of the existing building. I said, yeah, we could. It'd be a bit disruptive. And then the people who were living on the upper floors here said, well, we can see over the existing building, and that would spoil our view of the park. So I said, well, we could start at your roof level, couldn't we? Then you could look under the building, and you still have the view. It would be admittedly slightly different. And they all agreed to that. So we got a building permit in 12 weeks for this, because there was not one objection. And without working in that way with local people, I would never have thought about doing a box on legs. I mean, art schools are very simple, should be very simple buildings. They should be very robust. They shouldn't be over-designed, in my view, because otherwise it inhibits people. You know, you want to encourage someone to throw a bucket of paint or do something daft, wherever they choose to do something daft, because that's how they learn and that's how they interact. Anyway, it's there, and as a result of it being there, more facts coming up. The Mayor of Toronto, well, not the current Mayor of Toronto, because he's too busy with his crack taking, but the one before, told me that as a result of this building, tourism in Toronto went up by 2.9%, attributable to this building. Well, that's not bad. More importantly, perhaps, the number of students applying to study in this institution in 12 months went up by 300%. Well, there's a result. And people still like it. I can still walk down the street and people come out and say thank you. That's always very pleasant. I like it when people are nice to me. You like that too, don't you? Yes, nice when people are nice. And I think that's important. But the point is, I went in with no agenda here, architectural agenda. You just respond to what you learn, and you listen, and you do. And that's it. The legs actually are oil pipes, which are made just round the bend in Hamilton, Ontario. And then we just chamfered the ends, and that's the main part of the structure for the underside of the building. It works very well. My assistant at the time, who was living in Toronto, he went off to see at the steelworks the whole collection of tapered legs, and they were lying with their pointed ends. And he sent me he sent me on my phone a picture, and he captioned it. They were all lying there, all sort of rather rusty at that time, and he said, "Weapons of mass construction." I like that. And you know it's really successful when Johnny Walker Whiskey uses it in their advertising. Or someone dresses up in it for a fancy dress party. It's good, isn't it? There are all sorts of ways of measuring success, and it's not all to do with our rather moribund critics. This is in Singapore. The buildings, it's by the Singapore River. It's called Clark Quay. And Capital Land, my client, they built all these buildings in the traditional shop style. And the whole idea of building buildings, it should be full of bars, restaurants, clubs, and everything else, and a little bit of lunchtime economy, but mainly nighttime economy. And so they built it, and no one went. Then they came to me and said, "What can you do?" I said, "Well, you keep that bloody rain off for a start. That would help. You should move people out so they're partially hanging out over the river, because that's where people want to be. We could design it so that actually we can cool the street naturally, which we do. Not by much, but it all helps. On a good day, 2.5 degrees centigrade, but it is slightly cooler in the street. And now it's full. And we changed the colour of the existing buildings. Again, more recently, I just completed this earlier this year in Rotterdam. There are apartments, offices, shops, and a church. And I think it's okay. It is what it is. It's in Rotterdam. In Rotterdam, they think it's really radical. I think it's okay. I think it's a decent building. But one thing that interested me is the red part of the building, where there are apartments. 80% of those were sold to Chinese because it's red. I think, are you Chinese? Oh, okay. Well, you could be. No, okay. I can't say these things, but nonetheless, I thought that was interesting. So you always learn something by doing it. There's the church. Now, the church, the people from the church, they didn't choose me as the architect. I came with the overall package, so to speak. And they did thought at the beginning of the project that they thought they should actually talk to me, or at least meet me. I was very happy to meet them, 17 or so of them around the table, and said, "We have a few questions." Good, yeah. And the very first question is, "Do you believe in God?" I'd never been asked that question before in my life, and it was kind of difficult. Because the true answer is, I don't know. And but I didn't say that. I said, I believe I can create a space that will live the spirit. That seemed to be good, and we went on to the rest and had a few drinks, and that was it. I never saw them again until earlier this year, when I went to give a talk on Architecture Saturday or whatever, or the Architecture Weekend in Rotterdam. I gave it in the church, and the main minister, who asked me whether I believed in God, was in the audience. I thought, very nice man. No, I didn't talk to him before, and I gave my talk, which is not just about this project, it's about many others. And he came up to me and he said, "You know, you do believe in God." I said, "Thank you very much." That's good, isn't it? And that's it. It's really designed to catch the light in different ways. And then there are small things. Some of you may or may not know, I'm a professor in the Technical University in Vienna. And what's good about working in Vienna is you can get sponsorship much more easily than I think you can in this country. from various trades and industry. Anyway, with the students we built this, which originally we did in Vienna, then we moved to the Venice Biennale, and they lived in it, and it's all made out of timber pallets. But it is exceptionally cheap, exceptionally warm, and it does the job. And I think I'm very proud of that. Last year, I think it was, we completed this. We started off with a vision for the whole of Bradford. Bradford, for those of you who don't know, used to be an exceptionally wealthy city during the woolen industry, because that's what they had, and they had power and water, and there was sort of coal as well. And they were very, very wealthy. And somewhere in the 60s and 70s, of course, they started to, well, they didn't have so much money, and coal was declining. They went into decline. Then they started to allow really nasty investors to build really nasty buildings. And that's going to do a vision for the future of all of the city. And again, you work with the local people, the police, the old people, the children, everyone else, and you gradually evolve. And I suppose the product at that time is that we made a movie, which I'm not going to show you, and showed it in the cinemas and on local TV, and that was good. Then we went on, and in the middle of Bradford, and what you're looking at in the distance there, is the City Hall, which is a really fine building. But I can assure you, when I first went to Bradford, you couldn't see that building at all. It was surrounded by nasty things. And one of the nastiest was the police station. I remember the public meeting. I said, I think we could create something good. We could re-expose proper views of the City Hall. We create a place where you could all meet if you ever won the football cup, which they never will, of course, and some water. And that will then create values around the water, and then that will be the catalyst which might set things going. But I said, but it does involve knocking down the police station. I was cheered at that point. It was the most popular thing I think I've ever said. And after that, there was no problem with anyone. So the buildings were cleared, and then we created this puddle, I like to call it, because you can drain this. There's a big reservoir underneath, so it can be dry or it can be half full. And when the weather's warm, people go and paddle in it and play in it, and that's fine. That's sort of, you notice there's not a silver birch in sight, or a railway sleeper, or any crushed stuff. Going back further, see, by putting water, what I knew, because we did the barrage at Cardiff Bay, which is the old dock area. Now the bay itself was usually stinking mud. That's because they put raw sewage down the two rivers which feed into the bay. There's a 14-metre tidal range in this part of the UK. And therefore the concept, not my concept, I hasten to add, was to turn the bay into a freshwater lake, which again would then allow people to enjoy a water edge and extend the water edge, and of course they're still building these things out. So again, it's a sort of catalyst. The red bit, which is the barrage, it's not a mile long, but it's not far off a mile long, just to give you an idea of scale. So suddenly you double the area of urban Cardiff. Interesting. So there are many, many master plans, and we might say something about master plans a bit later, because I don't trust them really, but I think there are solutions to that. And also, the sluices and everything else. Just that little bit at the southern end, as you're looking at, which is actually the southwestern end, which has all the sort of really heavy engineering there, and the rock change. That's why we put it there, because we get all these concrete structures. They could be found on a solid base, so we thought. Not a bit, where all the test holes were driven, they all seem to indicate that the rock shelf went underneath, but actually it was just in a few spots where we happened to have drilled those boreholes. Digging and digging and digging. We had a cofferdam going around that whole area, and at one time there was a hole big enough to have put the old Wembley Stadium in twice. It was spectacular. I did try and persuade them. I said, why don't we just leave it like that? It was much more spectacular than what we think that we're trying to do. Anyway, I didn't win that, but it would have been. It was really good. But as a part of that project, well, there it is finished. I had to build. They asked me to build this little visitor centre, 1989, I think. That's the white thing there. Well, it's that one. And as a 5-year temporary building. Now, this building has been copied by other architects in various places around the world, 4 or 5 times to my knowledge, and maybe in other things. It was. It's based on my cigarette lighter, in the absence of anything better to do, and just measured it and blew it up. It's very lightweight, very inexpensive. It worked really well. And as a result of that, it was supposed to be there for 5 years. It was only removed, I think, 2 years ago, something like that. So it went on for a long, long time. And but I like to think that this small building was an instrumental part of the whole process of doing that enormous sort of what I call, well, it is an infrastructural project in some sense, because all the sewage treatment was dealt with on the rivers, and therefore the quality of the water is actually very good, to the point where they have now trout and I believe the odd salmon going back into the bay from the Bristol Channel. And so we did that, but I think that was a key move, the cheapest part of it. We actually moved the whole building once, 400 metres round the corner, because in this photograph it's on the site of where the Welsh Parliament building is, or the Welsh Assembly building is now, which is done by Richard Rogers. Another art school in New Cross for goldsmiths. Goldsmiths College, this is the fine art, or part of the fine art department, and straightforward. The scribble is often mistaken by people. They say, why did you put an artwork on it? It's not an artwork, it's a part of the composition. But what the most important thing to me here, and this is like something else which I just pass on to you, is, and it really came, I noticed it from Peckham Library. I didn't know that at the time. By putting the main body of the library at more or less at the top of the building, you could see views, and in that particular case, views of St Paul's Cathedral. So that suddenly, this rather run-down inner London area, which had problems, felt that they were actually a part of London. And I think that was an important process in the regeneration of Peckham. Peckham's really very lively now, and actually rather an interesting place for all sorts of reasons. And but when I first went here, what Goldsmiths told me is that they had lots of students who would like to go because it has a fantastic reputation, particularly for fine art. And then the students would go and do their due diligence, and they thought, in New Cross, I'm not in London. But actually, if you went to the higher elements, you can see you're certainly in London, because you can see everything right across to the Houses of Parliament, across St Paul's, the Dome, and way beyond, because it's on a slight hill. So I made that terrace for 2 reasons. One, to capture the view, so students who were thinking of studying there would be in no doubt that they were in London, because students don't only choose the course, they choose the location, and they choose the city. And that's what makes people want to go. And also, somewhere to smoke. And it's got nothing to do with smoke, that particular form, okay? Just so we're clear. Things can go wrong. I won, this is a competition I won, and then didn't win. And it's for Edmonton Art Gallery. I'm not going to go on about this, but and anyone from Edmonton? Anyone been to Edmonton? I wouldn't bother if I were you. It's really, really cold. Unbelievably freezing. Anyway, I think Zaha was invited into this, and me and Eric, the dead Canadian architect who I rather liked. I can't remember his name now. Doesn't matter, and a couple of others. But one of the others, I think they were all good architects in different ways, and they all did. And it was actually a very nice competition because everyone could present in front of the others, which is unusual. Then the jury met the next day to decide without any of the competitors. And I thought it was a very good system. So I could see what Zaha was doing and the others, and I found it very interesting. There was one guy who had a really bad project. I thought the other four were, including mine of course, were really interesting, and I could see that three of them, one of three, could win, and that it would do the job. They chose. In the end, I then went back to Toronto. I woke up in Toronto, and the local architect said, "You won the competition." I said, "Really? I don't believe that." Anyway, I had won the competition, as it turned out a couple of days later. Yeah, it just needs to be ratified by the board. The man that was giving the money to build this thing said, no, if I won it, then he would withdraw his money. In fact, if you don't give it to this bad piece of architecture, and you can ask Zaha, she would agree, and you can't ask Eric, he's dead, but we'd all agreed they're not doing it. Well, that was all a waste of time. I'm extending the story, and I put this here because I think competitions are horrible. I think they're a waste of most architects' time and effort. They're misused these days. And I have to say, this is not a plea because I'm old fart, but certainly in the UK, there were virtually no competitions when I was young. And when they did have a competition, there was something that was really important, and somehow that seemed okay. Coventry Cathedral was the result of actually a competition, I think, open to all the Commonwealth countries at the time. It's worth looking at some of the entries because some of them are very peculiar. You could see that certain Indian architects had never been to England, and their vision of what England was like was gained from books which were all out of date. So there's some pumped up sort of parish churches. But amongst all those things was what I think now is a really good building. And part of the strength of that building that Spence did was the fact there's quite a lot of artwork. There's John Piper, there's the Australian guy, there's Graham Sutherland, and all sorts of artworks in that building. And all the artists were his mates. I think that's quite interesting, isn't it? And because they all respected each other, somehow it all fits and works. If I tried to choose an artist for a public building today, and I have done, I know that you have to go through the proper channels. It has to be advertised. You have to do interviews. And there are all these bodies of people that will actually try and push and foist an artist on me who I hate. Not as a person, but I don't think their work has anything to do with my work. Life has become more complicated, and competitions are a part of that. And if you go to Vienna, I had lots of students in Vienna, and then they qualify, and a lot of them are pretty good, I have to say. And then you see them 2 years later and say, "What are you doing?" We set up our own bureau. I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Competitions." Okay. Then you see them a year later and say, "How's it going?" "Well, we got highly commended in the competition." I said, "You getting money for that?" No. Competitions for everything. Everything. And it is a waste of their time. They'd be better off going and working with someone they respect anywhere else in the world. And there are too many architects in Austria, and particularly too many in Vienna. But anyway, that's another story. I'd implore you, wherever you come from, I know you come from many different places, to get all the other architects of your age and all decide and publicly announce, we are not doing any competitions. That would help fuck it up, wouldn't it? But it's got to start somewhere. And I haven't done a competition since this, because that's the conclusion I came to. That's my thing. We don't need to talk about that. Done a bit of housing here and there in wood. More recently, the Blackfriars Station, just completed earlier this year. That was how it was at the beginning. This project was all about views of St Paul. The fact that the trains on the station, on the bridge at the time, interfere with that view seemed to be of no consequence. My first idea was to make the roof of the station so high that you could see St Paul's under the roof. But anyway, they wouldn't mind that. And there it is today, so that's okay. So that was just reminding you. I've probably used up all my time now, but nonetheless, a few things I wanted to say. Here's a picture of the sky. You will never ever do anything more beautiful than that. Okay? It's worth reminding yourselves of that. You can enjoy skies, and what is it about skies about? They're always changing. They're never the same. They tell us, they give us information, but that's the least interesting bit. They evoke emotion and ambience about where you are. Now that's an extraordinary quality. If you could do that as an architect, that would be unbelievable, wouldn't it? I mean, there'd be a challenge, and no reason not to try it, but you know that you'll fail before you start. But that doesn't stop you trying. Wouldn't that be marvellous? Please say yes. Is that a yes? Good. Thank God for that. You're awake. And this, which is just outside Shanghai, and you see that I think it's fishermen. I wasn't quite sure, to be honest, but that was built this thing, have a scaffold. They go out here, and I passed this place quite a few times and observed these three guys. I think they're pretending to fish. What they're really doing is drinking beer and smoking. And at the end of the day, they go home to their beloved one and say, well, I didn't catch much today. I'll try again tomorrow. It's sort of like those huts you see on allotments or in Germany's Schrebergarten. You know, you have all these men that go and sit in the hut all day, smoking and doing other things, maybe looking at pornography, who knows what they do. But, and it's just an excuse to go somewhere else. And I think that's rather wonderful. But I think it's a rather beautiful structure. You could never draw it, and B, you would never build it. But it has a quality. And as indeed this has a quality. This is in Morstan, on the North Norfolk coast. It's not Huntsville an area which I know rather well. But I'm always astounded at how long these things last, given that it's tidal and things move past it and boats moor up to it and people get on boats and go off and see the seals and etc., etc. But that's not the point. The point is, I would guarantee that the majority of people, if you showed them this photograph, would like it. I'm interested in what people like, actually. This is a part of a house in Spain which I've just converted. This house has no electricity. When it's a bit chilly, you can light a big fire just at the end of this, and that gives you heat, enormous fire, but no, there's no chimney. We just took part of the roof off. It's all right. If you want to wash, you have to put a bucket of water over you. Then you can step into a pool with fish and do the sort of the nice bit, you know, the sensual bit. That places us to sleep, of course, and you cook on using the embers from the fire on the original stone grill. It's good. It's there are pigs there, so the lighting is with pig fat, and that plank is the table. People pay £5,000 a week for a simple life. Isn't that interesting? I think we're going to extend this soon to actually add some more sleeping accommodation, and that will be new. It'll be partially buried, and the idea is that you'll have light. At the end of your sleeping space will be a glass wall, and on the other side of the glass wall will be your horse. So you can sort of sleep with your horse. People love their horses. You know, I'm not a horsey person myself. I hate horses, but I notice that people do love their horse a lot. If they could go to bed with them, they would. So this is the next best thing. You know. But and the bull's head is a piece of sculpture. That was the most important thing, the most expensive thing out of the whole project. And this is going on to a much bigger project, which I know we won't get to because it's towards the end of this talk, where we're turning a sort of 600 hectares into a sort of evolutionary project, which has no definition. This really interests me, and it's something that actually we might talk to, which could involve some students from here, some students from the Technical University they were out there 2 weeks ago, and then start to build some things. But anyway, that's something else. Where you work is important. I don't work in this bar, but it's underneath my studio. And it's called the Doodle Bar, and it's in Battersea, as near, I hate saying near Norman Foster. It's near Vivian Westwood. It sounds much better, doesn't it? Nothing against Norman, you understand. And people come here, and it's very popular. And of course, it's an existing building. And although we spent some money on it, you wouldn't know we spent any money. It's like undesign rather than design. And because of that, people like it. And you can never build this. You know, if someone's said, I want you to replicate this on another site, and it is not the same place, whatever you do. And we have all sorts of events there. Now, I don't know what date this was. I think it was just after I'd left, you know. A friend of mine who became head of a school in Wales, an art school, he said, well, you haven't got any experience, I can't give you the job, but we will hire you to actually rough things up a bit, to actually contribute to the brief or to find a process. It always interested me, because they were going to build a new school, local authority, architecture, all the rest of it. So I drew a series of plans. This is a possible plan. There are also a series of plans which are both full of meaning and have no meaning whatsoever. And then you could sit around with the staff and some of the students and say, right, this has a scale of X. You could decide on it, you could change the scale. Now you plan out how to use this as an art school. And guarantee that they were all interesting, their results. And of course it shows you can build anything you like for an art school. It's only a product of the size of the spaces. And are they sort of interesting? And do they encourage some sort of interaction or peculiarity or whatever? In other words, the art that's produced actually, I often thought about this for art museums, is that it consumes the work, as opposed to the other way around. The work consumes the space, as opposed to the conventional art gallery. Oh, we do this in white. I do that. And actually, it's the room controlling the work rather than the other way around. It's an important question. I have no real solution, no real answer to that or conclusion to it. But I like it. So you see, when you come to the Tate Modern, which I was one of the original architects invited to make a proposal for this, you know, everyone seemed to be in awe of the fact of the turbine hall. Well, it's 150 metres long. It was actually exactly the same as the atrium in my building at Marseille. So that was one of the main concerns. But it seemed to me, and I'm not sure that the Tate Modern is totally successful, because in terms of visitor numbers, yeah, it's very successful. To me, the spaces are too low. They're too constricted, in my view. And in a way, I think the turbine hall equally is too big. I mean, so it didn't actually fit anything. So what my proposal was that you've got one architecture. They wanted at that time 6 specific galleries, and they were quite precise. And actually, we'd actually put them through the building or on top of the building. They'd be designed for what they are, and that's it. So you'd have 2 architectures on the same site. That's quite interesting. Anyway, I didn't win, and that was the end of it. Or, and this one is quite old. This is a sort of, we call it consequences, or what's the other? This is a building for Normandy, to be built in Normandy, with 4 different architects. And it's me at the bottom, as you see, with some shopping, funny enough, and an aviary. And immediately above that is offices by Massimiliano Fuxas. And above that is some residential element, which is by Otto Steidler, who's now sadly dead. And above that, starting at the golden bit, and then is a hotel by Jean Nouvel. It's kind of interesting. I think we only had 2 meetings, and maybe you would say, it shows. But nonetheless, what interested me at the time, because I thought we'd never build it, and of course we didn't, but it was, A, they paid you properly, and B, the Caisse Depot, which is like the Bank of England in France, it funds projects through the mayor, took this project really seriously. Now, in this country we had things called regional development agencies, who, if they couldn't see how you would build it, they didn't value architecture. What they valued was what their perception of value was. They don't exist anymore. And that meant, looks cheap. They never say that, of course, but that's what it is. And they surround themselves by experts. We are surrounded by experts, you'll find, and you'll notice that experts make life really difficult, because the more difficult they make life, the more money they get paid. It's as simple as that. How am I doing for time, Andrea? No, that's not the right answer. I should have checked it myself. No, I think 10 minutes, and we stop. I was going to talk about, and this is an old project for Belfast, and I've got lots of stories about Belfast, which I won't tell you now, but what interested me there at this time was the idea of sort of style, and also how different communities would only meet in the centre, and this building was all about the plan as a proposal, and my plan here was the development of the environment, Northern Ireland, and to make a place which is somehow a combination between leisure, education, skills, craft, little bits of shopping, and eating and drinking, of course, and all of that, to be built on the old bus station site. Certain element of invention. I didn't like the building, I liked the plan, and the idea of playing with the plan to actually create something which might be socially useful was quite important to me. I won't talk about Bordeaux, obvious it is. Ah yeah, space. Now I used to teach in Bremen, and this was our architecture studio. Now that's not bad for space, is it? And it had a crane, had piles of cut-up ships outside, had welding equipment. Oh, we could do anything you like. We had computers and all the rest of it as well. But it always felt, what I really liked about this, you could do anything. There was nothing to stop you doing stuff. Now, space is a very interesting thing. I know it's interesting because you can do things with it as an architect, but just space, to have it, has become a luxury. Here, I had lots of space, more space than we needed, and there's lots of stories about this place and how we got the politicians involved, and politicians would come to a party every month, providing they were going to listen to all of my students' proposals about things to do in Bremen. That was the whole point. We'd only think about Bremen. In return, the politicians, or the council, through the politicians, would give enough money to my students for beer and cigarettes. And they agreed. And then everyone enjoyed it, and it was good. And they were sort of completely stupid or mad ideas, but they were all ideas and thoughts, and that fed into the politicians. We need to find a way of getting nearer to the politicians with really interesting, but maybe outrageous or impossible ideas, but it changes things. And I think that's part of our job, to do that, if you can. Easy to say, difficult to do. But that was a great studio, which I enjoyed very much. And there's some big models, and these are things which... That was the first project I ever did at the AA, in my first year. That was the front cover. The other drawings were much better than that, but it was a family home which could travel anywhere in the world, self-sufficient. It pressed all the buttons. Now, you have to remember, one reason I wanted to come and study architecture at the AA was because of archigram. Very important to me. And even though I was brought up in Northampton, which is a relatively small town somewhere between here and Birmingham, I could get this thing called the Archigram magazine. And I'd look at it and I'd say, oh, that's what I mean. That's more of the stuff. I mean, I knew all about Corbusier and all those other things, and they excited me when I was younger. And when I got to the age of sort of 18, 19, I was more interested in this than that. And of course, you come here, and I was surrounded by it. And it was wonderful, really wonderful. And of course, there was a time, I mean, as a result of that, that's why I did the competition for the Centre Pompidou. I suddenly got to the third year, I've been studying here, and designed a building. So I suppose I better do one of those, take a read. And I thought that was interesting. You know, and we were versed in the philosophy of Karl Popper and about viewing architecture as problem solving. None of these things I think I agree with anymore. But they're an important part of your life, and they're part of what I am today. And whatever you're being taught today and in your experiences, they'll go down, and that's what you'll be when you get to 60 or 65. Don't ignore it. And some things you're thinking about today, they may go out of date, you know. You might return to those when you're when you're middle age, and you'll just do the same idea. And don't be ashamed of that, but you'll do it better because you know more. And I think that's really important too. It's about all those things that we absorb and don't know we're absorbing, and then it comes out in some form or other. This is also at the AA. This is my protest about housing. But because not so far after this, which I did in Groningen, which is a temporary structure, it's going to be used in many different ways for the festivals they have there in that part of Holland. And actually, that was the first time it was used in the main town square. There's a choir there, and of course I went to and the choir was called the Screaming Finns. I thought, I wonder what they're going to do. They screamed for 2 hours. But it was kind of interesting. I say kind of advisedly, okay? I'm glad I was there, but only just. It was good. Or playing with bits of stuff in the countryside. Discovered with a whole roll of melamine, with the wind going through it, it made a certain noise, and cows wouldn't pass. That's why, that point. I never did anything with it, but I mean, you would never know if you didn't try it. Just try things. That was another competition I did win as a student, but anyway, nonetheless. And maybe I'll just finish off. This is a building by Cedric Price. It's no like it's been taken away, and of course that's what attracted Cedric to taking on the commission in the first place. That it would be removed in the year 2000. As a fact, it wasn't. It clung on, but eventually it has been removed. That's what he liked, leaving no trace, really, of his architectural. You know, I was the project architect on this, and two things I learned. One, if ever I asked Cedric, because I was quite young at this time, if ever I asked Cedric for a bit of advice on a bit of architectural detail, he'd say, later. And he never answered it. So I thought, oh, Cedric, you're the boss, you know. Anyway, that's one story. The other, much more interesting thing is that Cedric insisted that, with one or two exceptions of the main structure, that all of the building would be designed in such a way that you could take it apart with a standard bicycle spanner. It's like this idea of people changing. So all the windows could be swapped around, bits of the cladding could be swapped around, and there were significant bits internally that could be all attacked with a standard bicycle spanner. Because it sounds easy, but you had to work at that a bit, and you had to insist that that's the way it was done. And then he liked the fact that there were different porter cabins here, with all the laboratories and anything to do with wet services went in there. And there was a standard, I think it was Norwegian or Swedish log cabin at the end, which became part of it. Whitbread Brewery, I think it was, when fitted out the bar with oak panelling and everything like that, because it was cheap. And but it was a period of high inflation, and the money was being given, or had to be raised or given, and most of it came from Camden Council. And the client was a man called Ed Bowman, who was an interesting man. He's an American, always smoked a huge cigar. I think that's why he gave Cedric the job, you know, because they could have cigars together. And he was fearsome. And he got some money, and we got enough money to do the drainage, a very thick concrete slab, very well-known engineer was the engineer, his name from Felix J. Samueli, you know, doesn't matter now, but, and then, and steel frame. And it was better to spend the money, even though you didn't have the rest of the money, than to bank it, because inflation would then mean you couldn't do the first bit again. Inflation was very high, 15%, something like that. It was scary. That was interesting, because suddenly you've got this flat playing field. And of course, all the guys who work for Interaction then learned that, well, you could put tarpaulins over the thing, you could actually have events. As a young architect, because they were always changing their brief, because the person in charge of silkscreen printing would suddenly change every month. They would change, and they had different ideas. But you could actually go and chalk out on the slab at 1-to-1 what the layout of the building might be. And of course, it did change. It didn't. In the end, we built an earlier version of it because we just had to get on with it. But there's a question of the other money that had to be raised for this, and it could only really come from the council. I went to the council meeting with Ed Berman, where they were voting on this, and they voted to give them the rest of the money. He immediately stood up and said, he didn't even say thank you. He said, I have an urban farm, and you're wanting to knock it down, and I've got photographs of some of you councillors on our donkeys, and we're going to have to kill those donkeys, therefore I'm going to brand you donkey killers. And he saved the farm as well. I was astounded that this sort of response, which is very strong, but he won. So sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in and be a bit rude, maybe. I think I will stop there. There's loads of slides else, but I haven't shown you anything of what we're doing today. But anyway, who cares? Thank you.
Okay. Questions?
No questions asked. I'll ask you a question. How old are you? Seems only fair. You know how I am. Thank you. And long may it continue, I hope.
I have a question, and that's...
Oh, it's you.
Yeah, it's me, yes. I mean, all the works that you showed are quite bold and quite, and as you put it, it's the way it is. And I mean, as a student of architecture or somebody who's just into architecture, how do you gain that front? Because it's also, you have to convince your client and it's not just up to you. So how do you express that and be so free, in fact?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I really know the answer. But I think you have to work at it. I mean, I think I was on Peckham Library, for example, on the north facade, there's quite a lot of coloured glass. I think I might have been the first to do that. Now Sabra, Hutton do it all the time. So it becomes also one thing which seemed to be radical, and it did create a lot of debate as to whether that should be there. And I don't know how we won the debate. Charm, alcohol, I don't know. But and also trying to explain. I really don't like explaining something because there's something that you shouldn't have to explain. It's like you don't want to. If you do a painting, you don't want to explain the painting, do you? Because that somehow devalues it. You just want to enjoy the painting. And I think there's some aspects of architecture which fall into the same category. But I think you have to do what you think is the right thing to do. And I have a project actually in Battersea at the moment, and my client wanted, and I'm delighted, he's got an existing building there, only 4.5 stories high, and he suddenly realised that he could add another 4 stories on top, according to the local plan. And he said, I know you can build things over buildings, because he knew the Oak Count building, and you can do that. And that's what I'd like to do, because I want to keep the existing tenants in there doing it. And by that he means that he's got an apartment in there himself, and he doesn't want to move. But so I looked at it, sort of sketched it out. It's a really bad proportion. So I worked on it, and I said, you don't need 4 or 5 stories. you need 19 stories. It's a much better proportion. And he said, you're completely mad. I said, well, let's test it. So you do, then you have to do quite a lot of work. You know, and the fact that it was 19 stories is the bit that we're adding, the 19-story bit over the existing. It does conform to the golden section, which I haven't talked about tonight. But it's not there for no reason, the golden section. I'm not sure we all understand it. There's lots written about it, but it's all about application. And you can say it works. So these days here, you wouldn't know this, but you have to do what's called a pre-application meeting. So you've done quite a lot of work. You send that to the planners, and then you have a meeting, which you pay for, not me, client. And then you have this meeting, and my client was really nervous because I said, I didn't really want you to come to the meeting. And he said, no, I insist. I said, fine. And we walked into the room. There's a bit of colour attached to it, and it's not on this presentation, so I can't show it to you. And there were three people from the planning department. And they looked at it and said, this is fantastic, exactly what we want. Now how can we help? So I looked at my client and said, fees have gone up. But that's true, it's right, because it wasn't quite simple. That's how they introduced us. Then I gave them the presentation. I explained the proportions of this building and why it's the right thing to do. So you had to develop the arguments. So they had to be truthful arguments. You can't just make it up. But of course, sometimes I feel that some of these experts, particularly urbanists, they make things up. I really do. Suddenly something becomes terribly important, which is actually not in the least bit important. And I think it's a waste of time. I think we could all be doing much more without many of the consultants who are they're sort of multiplied in number like rabbits. Really. You only need three things. You need someone to work with the building, some designer or architect, whatever. You need someone to pay for it, which is quite useful. You do need a good structural engineer. That's very important. I love structural engineers dearly. And you need someone to give you authority. That's all. Oh, someone to build it, rather. That's quite handy too. But then everyone else is an add-on, really, who inflated their own sense of importance. And actually, in the end, will make some of the things that I'm sure you would like to do more difficult, not easier. Life should be easier than it is. But don't give up. That's the important point.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, towards the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned that you'd have maybe an urban situation where nothing would be demolished, mm-hmm. and you would simply perhaps add on to or change. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Well, it's one of my students in Bremen, by the way, playing. We have listed buildings, as you well know, or protected buildings, rightly, usually, and I'm all in favour of that and looking after what we have. It doesn't mean to say you can't do anything with them, but I'm glad the fact that I've just been thinking about this and again listening to people, and I have now a vast experience of listening to what we might call the general public, and I do listen to them. And I get them to draw, and I hear one thing, that they actually quite like this. Or when we did a lot of work in Berlin and Potsdam Platz around there, and of course when the wall first came down, I can't remember the name of the building. You might remember it, Mark. But there was a huge East Berlin building, which the West Berlin wanted to knock down. Or I think they have knocked it down now. But there was a plea. I mean, it was a horrible, ugly building. On the other hand, the scale of it was so big that it was quite impressive and quite interesting at the same time. But more importantly, some of the people some of the East Berliners said, please don't knock that down, because actually we had a club in there, and we'd go there and we'd eat, and we have good memories of being in that building. I think,
It was like the town hall.
Yes.
In the sense, because people have got married there.
Yeah.
The what? Yes. Sorry.
Yes, that's it. I mean, it was.
And they said then it was asbestos, which it wasn't.
Yeah. But I have some sympathy for that. We all do things and we accumulate experiences. Why would you knock those down? You don't have to.
Because they wanted to put up the Hohenzollern, a fake Hohenzollern castle.
They are. They are. So it's better to leave things, I think, and then adapt them and change them, so that they actually keep changing as we get older.
But that's probably not what Cedric Price would do.
Well, I love Cedric. I don't do everything that he said. It's not infallible,
So I think my question would be, how much have you taken from him rather than those two little things that you said?
Inevitably, he was a very powerful, dominant person, but first and foremost, he's a very likable person, which is really important, and he's a very kind person as well. That's important. But I often find, if I'm fiddling around thinking about things, sometimes I feel that Cedric's sitting on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, saying things like, "You should be ashamed of yourself," or whatever. That's quite useful, and it's good for you to find someone that you respect and admire. They have to do everything they do, of course, by any means, because you need something to measure sometimes what you're thinking about against, and it can only truly be someone that you have a lot of time for. So he's around still. Bugger it! I try and get rid of him. Piss off. That he doesn't go. No more questions.
I mean, I can think of a question which, in a way, sort of brings together a certain sort of gap in the AA's history. There's one kind of question which students want to know the answer to without always being able to frame the question, and somehow it seems to me you'd have something to say to it. In a way, when people who are students now are invited to look back on the history of the AA over 40 years, say, like at the beginning of the 80s or at the end of the 70s, it's clear somehow that there's not much written about it, if at all. But there's an assumption among students and staff that to be a radical or avant-garde architect, whatever you mean by that, is automatically to be, in some political sense, kind of progressive, whatever progressive means now. And it feels to me that there was a kind of sea change in the middle. That is to say, to put it in terms of a parable, finally, aspects of the avant-garde knocked on the doors of corporate capitalism, and instead of being kicked down the stairs, they were welcomed in. And therefore there was no aesthetic obstacle to something like kind of Dubai or whatever. And I think the loss of that assumption, which perhaps was never quite justified in the first place, of the relationship, not in a detailed way, but the radicalism in architecture commits you in some way to a certain radicalism in your concept of society, is important. And it's that, of course, which seems to be not only under threat, but in many ways gone.
I think I would agree with that.
There turned out to be no obstacle to the thoroughgoing commercialization of the avant-garde.
That's also true. Undoubtedly, it became something else, and to the point where it has very little meaning, I think. So certainly, you're all aware, particularly not in Dubai, but like China, they're just daft buildings, I suppose, all the time. You know, you just press the wobble button on the computer, oh, that was it. And it's only about the form, and I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think that is the case. But back in the day, but in my period when I was a student here, which is terribly influential, so you ask about Cedric Price being an influence, but it wasn't only Cedric, I mean it was actually being here at that time, from 68 till 73 I think I finished. There was a whole range of quite extraordinary people here, but you have to also remember there were hippies here. You know, so there were people doing all sorts of funny things, like growing their own food by fertilising it with their own shit. And they would carry bags of their feces, plastic bags, on the tube to an allotment. Good. There was a group called, I think they're called Urban Street Farmers, but they were farmers too, and they had their own magazine. Probably fired by the Archigram magazine. They can do a magazine, so can we. Nothing wrong with that. You had people that did some very valuable work in terms of wind turbines and all of those things. Probably fired a bit by reading the whole Earth catalogue, which some of you might have never seen, and if you haven't seen it, you should go and have a look at it. It's really interesting. But they were branded as hippies. I think it's kind of going on to the subject of commercialisation. Now, as a lot of them, and maintaining that sort of line of inquiry, if you like, there's the first sort of talking about we are damaging the planet. All this, it wasn't known as green or ecologically friendly. It was just seemed sensible at the time, and but it's given birth to all sorts of things that have come to me, and also including some people have become very wealthy out of doing, not necessarily the people that were here, I have to say. And I think that's so. Well, they're just hippies. They're fiddling around at the edges, but actually, what they're fiddling with was really important. Has proved to be really important, and is now taken extremely seriously, quite rightly, by all sorts of people. Maybe not enough, but it's grown and grown and grown. And I think, as an educational institution, that's exactly one of the roles that it can fulfil, is to encourage those things which are perhaps at the very edge of what might go on. When you come down to architecture, I think architecture is going to change completely, really. And there is room for all sorts of approaches, and I appreciate that. It's not just because I've got older. I just like the fact that, as I said at the beginning, if you do something with intent, then even though I think it's horrid, I will like it. I can respond to that. Providing you don't do it everywhere, You do it everywhere, that's fine. So, it's horrible. So that, you do something, and then you do something else, and it's completely different, but actually somehow that works. And therefore you add, going back to the earlier point about adding to existing buildings and existing fabric, playing around with the street a bit. We have this sense of an evolving city, which I think is quite interesting, which is what I don't like about master plans. A bad master plan is an assumption that's what you build. And of course it doesn't work. It often takes years to build out something. You can't change anything. That's ridiculous. It doesn't work. I mean, I'm always curious that, say, the city of Toronto, which I know very well, as I know reasonably well, Melbourne, are more or less exactly the same population, 3.5, 4-ish million. Both cities, the centre of the cities, were laid out by the military. Except they got something that's a bit wrong in Melbourne, didn't they? They sort of cranked that grid, which is sort of endless discussion amongst urbanists. The interest of this cranked grid in Melbourne. You think, no, that's the bit where I get lost, actually. Or you could have done something else. Or I find that fascinating but in both cases, these cities, they have an increasingly dense urban core, in line with this whole idea of get more people living near the centre, less distance to work, and all, it all makes sense. But then they go out. So they occupy a huge area of land. I don't know what the dimensions of Melbourne are, but they're probably 60 miles at least, east-west, and 40 north. And that's similar to Toronto. It just goes on and on in a sort of relentless suburbia. I worry about that. I've got nothing against suburbia, but I know from our own research, from working in towns, you go to a certain point, which is a certain distance from the city centre, the people living there feel they have nothing to do with the city, they don't contribute anything to the city. When they go shopping, they go to somewhere else. And they're forced to use their cars because the infrastructure can't cope with that huge expanse. And it makes a nonsense. And people get disgruntled, they spend ages going to their centre of employment, which is probably in the middle. Within ages getting home, wife's on drugs, they're not paid enough, they beat each other up. There's divorce, it costs a fortune in society. Just because they live in the wrong place. So, there are big issues, and I like the idea of filling in things, not always knocking down, filling them in and changing. But I wasn't really sure what your question was, Mark, but I was just sort of rambling on.
Okay, I think we should finish. So thank you very, very much for coming.
Very nice to meet you.